Listen up, you should never go alone in the White Mountains or in any national forest. And on November 20th, 2022, 19-year-old Emily Sotelo learned that lesson in tragic fashion. At 4:30 in the morning, Emily and her mother pulled into a dark trailhead parking lot. Emily stepped out of the car, she got ready, she said her goodbye to her mother, and then she set out into the dark forest all alone. Now, this was supposed to be a very special hike, but there was a massive problem. You see, Emily wasn't about to take on just some ordinary trail. No, she was solo hiking in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, a range notorious for claiming lives, especially in November and especially when you're really far away from help. The White Mountains might not look especially huge or dramatic from a distance, and that's actually part of what makes them so dangerous. They have a way of waiting until you're fully committed before showing you what they're actually capable of. Just 30 minutes after starting her hike, Emily sent her mother a text listing what she wanted for lunch afterwards. Some quinoa, some chicken, papaya, coffee, and water. It's such a normal little text message, and I think that's what makes it hit so hard, because at 5 a.m., this still felt like a completely normal day in the mountains. But as Emily climbed higher and higher, the trail began to change. The trees started to thin, the mountain opened up, and eventually she approached Greenleaf Hut, which is a well-known shelter on the route. In the warmer months, this is the kind of place where a hiker can stop, regroup, and maybe get out of the elements for a bit. However, when Emily got there, the hut was locked and shut for the season. If things were already starting to go wrong by this point in her hike, that hut might have been her last real chance at safety. Later that morning, Emily's mom sent her another simple text message asking how the hike was going. But Emily didn't respond. The silence probably worried her mother a little bit, but Emily was experienced after all. She had hiked these kinds of mountains countless times before. Surely she would be fine. Surely she would text back soon, right? Emily Sotelo grew up in the town of Westford, Massachusetts, which is just about an hour northwest of Boston. Now, by all accounts, she was the type of person who just seemed to succeed at just about everything she did, right? Teachers described her as smart, disciplined, curious, while friends often talked about how kind she was. She had that rare combination of being both extremely motivated and truly compassionate, someone who pushed herself to achieve big goals, but still made time to help the people around her. She attended Vanderbilt University, where she began studying biochemistry and public health, with her long-term goal being to become a doctor. And that totally checks out to me after hearing all about how the people in her life spoke so highly of her. I mean, helping people was just her natural instinct. But somewhere along the way during this journey, Emily discovered something else that she loved as well. She discovered hiking at the age of 17, and she was hooked immediately. And honestly, I know exactly how Emily felt. I grew up in New England as well, and don't let the name of my channel fool you. I actually love hiking. I just want people to do it safely, which is a big reason why I tell these stories. Oh, and if you appreciate the way that I tell these stories, by the way, if you've watched a few videos now, please consider subscribing and helping us reach our goal of 1 million subscribers this year. I'm not perfect, I do make mistakes sometimes, but I really believe in the content that I make, and so if you could help me reach this goal, I would really appreciate it, especially if you like stories told by a non-AI voice. Now, Emily didn't grow up as like a hardcore outdoorsy kid, but once she discovered the mountains of New England, she started to attack her new hobby with serious passion. She just simply wasn't satisfied with doing anything in her life unless she gave it 100% effort. And so when she read about something called the New Hampshire 48 Challenge, she was all in. The idea behind this challenge is pretty simple. There are 48 peaks in the White Mountains of New Hampshire that rise above 4,000 feet, and hikers try to complete every single one of these mountains, checking them off the list as they go. And this sounds like a pretty straightforward challenge, at least on paper, but trust me, it is not easy, and I can tell you that from experience. It took me about 5 years and even a few failed attempts to finally complete my New Hampshire 48. And after hearing about what happened to Emily, I consider myself pretty lucky to have racked up all 48 in one piece. In fact, Emily's story really struck a chord with me because I followed pretty much the exact same trajectory as her when I was in my late teens. I discovered hiking around the same formative age, and one of the first challenges I got obsessed with was the New Hampshire 48. Now, I'm not trying to make this video about me, but I'm just saying, like, this one hits me really hard because I did the exact same challenge at the exact same age in the exact same place. The only difference is that I turned out fine, and Emily, well, I'll get there. Emily approached the New Hampshire 48 challenge with the same determination that she brought to everything else in her life. Within just 2 years of starting to hike regularly, she had already climbed 40 of the 48 peaks, which is super impressive, a lot faster than I did it. I mean, that pace would be pretty insane for some of the more experienced hikers I know, especially when you consider how rugged many of those trails are. But Emily was young, athletic, and extremely motivated. She seemed to thrive in the face of the challenge, and she was about to face her biggest challenge yet. Emily decided that she was going to speed run her last 8 peaks before her 20th birthday, and the final stretch of summits was about to bring her through the heart of some of the most uncertain and dangerous terrain that the White Mountains have to offer. Now, the Whites, as we call them, are well known throughout the hiking world, but from a distance, they really don't look especially intimidating. The absolute tallest peak in the White Mountains is only 6,288 feet in elevation, and so when you compare that to the towering peaks in Colorado, for instance, where the tallest mountain is around 14,440 feet, well, the White Mountains almost look easy, but if you spend enough time in these mountains like I have, or if you talk to the search and rescue teams who patrol them, you'll quickly learn that the White Mountains have a way of almost luring you in with their more like low-key disappearance, and it isn't until you're approaching the summit that they finally decide to strike. To be a little more specific, the weather in the White Mountains is notorious for changing without warning, shifting from calm, clear skies to these hurricane-force winds and blinding snow in just moments. And I'm not being dramatic, by the way. Mount Washington, for example, once recorded wind gusts of 231 miles per hour, which for a long time held the world record for the highest wind speed ever measured on Earth. I'm pretty sure it still holds the record for like North America. And so I'm telling you, these mountains are no joke. They're dangerous. And yet, despite those things, they're very popular, thanks in part to their proximity to major cities like Boston and New York. And year-round, they draw hikers in search of adventure. But quite often, those trips take a very tragic turn. As Thanksgiving break was approaching, Emily decided that she had a window of opportunity to complete her challenge. If she was able to plan everything out just right, she thought that she would be able to knock out the 8 remaining peaks during that break. And so she mapped out 3 straight days of hiking multiple mountains that would end with a celebratory hike and dinner with her mom on her 20th birthday, November 23rd, 2022. Now, this was a very ambitious plan, maybe even a little aggressive, but Emily had already proven that she could move quickly in the mountains. Finishing the New Hampshire 48 before turning 20 was all that she could think about, and her first day was going to take her across one of the most famously difficult hikes in the entire White Mountains. That would be Franconia Ridge. Franconia Ridge is an exposed ridgeline that connects several peaks, Mount Lafayette, Little Haystack, and Mount Flume, a few others. And on a clear spring or summer day, the ridgeline can be the perfect spot to capture sweeping views across miles of wilderness in pretty much every direction. I've hiked Franconia Ridge at least 4 times that I can remember. And so I'm telling you from experience here, this is the kind of hike that people travel all across the region just to experience. It's unbelievable. But if you're not careful, the priceless view at the top of the ridge might just cost you everything. And I say that because once you reach the top of the ridge, you're completely exposed to the weather. There's no trees to block the wind. There's no shelter from snow or rain, just this open alpine terrain where conditions can turn brutal in an instant. Now, Emily was well aware of this, obviously. I mean, she had already climbed many challenging mountains in the region, and she had spent plenty of time researching routes and looking at trail reports before her trip. But still, it was late November in the White Mountains, and Mother Nature doesn't care whether you're a high achiever who graduated at the top of your class or whether you dropped out of school. It's always going to do whatever the hell it wants. And it pains me to say this, but Emily was about to find this out the hard way. Now, there's going to be a very important give back call out at the end of this video, and honestly, it wouldn't be possible for me to do this without the support of Drink Element. Oh, and it also wouldn't be possible for me to hike in the White Mountains without Element either. They are the sponsor of this video, and they're the reason I stay hydrated when I'm in these mountains. And lately, Element Sparkling has been what I've been drinking the most. You see, sometimes I want the electrolytes, but I don't want to stop and like mix a whole drink. I just want to crack open a cold can and keep moving, and that's exactly what this is. It's fizzy, it's salty, it's super refreshing, especially lemonade salt right here. It has 0 sugar as well. Plus, it actually tastes like something you'd want to drink, not just something you're trying to force down because you need it or it's good for you or whatever, right? It's really a different vibe from the Element packets. I love the Element packets too, but sparkling is just like a different vibe, and so I've just been really into it lately. I love having something that I can throw in the car, crack open at a trailhead, or drink on the drive home when I'm just totally exhausted. It just makes staying on top of hydration way more automatic for me. And this isn't just some random sparkling water pretending to be healthy, by the way. Each 12-ounce can has 500 milligrams of sodium, 100 milligrams of potassium, and 30 milligrams of magnesium. And it's just so refreshing. And so if you want to try it and also get some free Element in the process, go to drinkelement.com/KyleHatesHiking. That's drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking. Go to that link and make any purchase. And again, I'd recommend sparkling lemonade salt. And when you do that, you're going to get a free sample pack of Element sticks thrown in with your order for no extra cost. And so one more time, that's drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking, or click the link at the top of the description. And okay, now back to the story. On Saturday, November 20th, the day before her hike, Emily and her mother, Olivera, stopped to pick up some supplies. Emily planned to pack a couple snacks for her first trek, some granola bars, some fruits. She was going to bring some water, of course. She also packed a portable battery pack so she could keep her phone charged throughout the day to serve as both her trail map and a flashlight if she needed it. Now, I don't know all the nitty-gritty details of exactly what she packed, but from the research that I did, it seems like she didn't pack super extensively. It feels like the stuff that I'd pack for maybe like a casual little loop in like my local park. But Emily's trip was about to take her a total of 13.7 miles across multiple cold, wintry peaks. She also planned on wearing a pair of thermal underwear, some athletic leggings, a light jacket, and trail running shoes. And I will say, November in the White Mountains is kind of a tough time of year to pack for because it's not like full on winter yet with like feet of snow, but it's also cold and wintry enough that like your summer gear doesn't really work either. It is kind of tricky. All I can say is that it's clear to me that her clothing and her gear choices were both better suited for more like casual fall hiking conditions, not dangerous alpine winter conditions. But then again, it was November after all. At the lower elevations that time of year, it can still very much feel like fall and not winter. And so I'm not trying to blame her here. She didn't bring any insulated boots. She didn't bring a heavy winter coat. She didn't have any micro spikes. She didn't pack a ton of extra layers or a hat or any specialized winter gear. Her only real like cold weather equipment was a pair of heated gloves. And again, at the time, that decision probably seemed perfectly reasonable. The weather forecast had only called for temperatures in the low 30-degree Fahrenheit range and maybe just a little bit of snow. However, anyone who has ever chased big goals in the wilderness knows that even if you expect the best possible conditions, you still have to prepare for the absolute worst. What Emily did not realize was that the forecast up at the top of Franconia Ridge told a very different story. Up there, wind gusts were expected to approach 95 miles per hour. And when you combine that with the already freezing temperatures, the resulting wind chill can make it feel more like 0 degrees Fahrenheit, which is cold enough to freeze exposed skin very, very quickly. And so unfortunately, despite all of her planning, Emily either didn't notice this critical part of the forecast or she severely underestimated it. I'm not sure which one it was. That evening, Emily reviewed her maps, she finished some schoolwork, and she laid out her gear for the next morning. Her mother could tell how excited she was about this big adventure. I mean, she was going to finish the New Hampshire 48 before she turned 20. She was going to accomplish her goal. As far as her mother was concerned, she had raised a real-life superhero, right? Unfortunately, Every superhero has their kryptonite, and neither of them had any idea that Emily was about to step into the biggest battle of her entire life. The next morning started extremely early. Emily set an alarm for 4 a.m. and then started gearing up for the big day. Her mother drove her to the Lafayette Place campground parking lot near Franconia Ridge and dropped Emily off by 4:30 a.m. It was still completely dark outside at this time, and the forest surrounding the parking lot was very quiet, except for the faint crunch of snow underneath their feet. Before the two said their goodbyes, they confirmed that Emily's mother would pick Emily up in this exact same spot in 8 hours. Then Emily turned on the flashlight on her phone and began walking into the woods on a trail called the Old Bridle Path, which would take her to the summit of her first peak of the day, Mount Lafayette. Her mother watched as the small circle of light drifted along the trail for just a moment, getting smaller and smaller as it bounced off into the distance. And by the time it had disappeared into the darkness, Emily's mother was beaming with pride for her ambitious daughter. I mean, how could she not, right? The thing is, though, she had no idea that their goodbye in the parking lot there, well, that would be the last time that she was ever gonna see Emily alive. Just 30 minutes later, around 5 a.m., Emily sent her mother a text from the Old Bridle Path listing what she wanted for a late lunch once she finished. She wanted some quinoa, some chicken, papaya, coffee, and some water. She was clearly already feeling pretty confident about handing this 13+ mile hike since she was already focused on lunch. Or maybe she was slowly realizing that the granola bars she'd packed weren't going to be that substantial and that she was going to be very hungry when this thing was over. I'm not exactly sure. At first, the hike likely felt pretty normal for Emily. The lower section of the Old Bridle Path winds through dense forest, gradually climbing higher as it follows a series of small waterfalls and rocky streams. I've done this trail a few times. It's very beautiful, and Emily had done plenty of hikes just like this before. Hell, she'd already summited 40 mountains over 4,000 feet just in the state of New Hampshire alone. I mean, she was practically built for this. The steady uphill climb, the quiet forest, the sound of light-packed snow crunching beneath her shoes. I mean, I can practically picture it myself. I mean, probably because I've been there, but even though the weather has been slightly warmer whenever I've been there, I can almost imagine that the winter conditions probably made it feel even more serene and peaceful, even if that peace wasn't going to last for much longer. As she gained elevation, the environment around her quickly began to change. The snow grew deeper, the wind started to pick up a lot more, and eventually the trees started to thin out as she approached the exposed ridgeline near a popular landmark on the trail called Greenleaf Hut. This hut is a well-known and well-used shelter during the warmer months, but when Emily arrived, it was locked up and bolted for the winter. Now, I'm almost certain that she knew the hut was going to be closed. I mean, it's very common for these huts to close off, you know, when it gets colder. But as she stood there, very high on the mountain now, and the wind chill continued to make the temperatures feel colder and colder, I'm sure that Greenleaf Hut would have been a pretty nice place to take a moment and warm up and take a break from the storm that was only just getting started. By 11 a.m., it was like properly snowing and the winds were already roaring across the ridge at incredible speeds. Oh, and the temperature was hovering near 0 degrees. And so without heavy winter clothing, that cold would have started biting into Emily's skin almost immediately. And it's around this time that Emily's mom sent her a text message asking how the hike was going. She was, again, extremely proud of her driven daughter and was getting excited to celebrate her multiple mountain trek with a well-deserved late lunch once Emily finished. Her mother sent this text and then she waited and waited and waited, waiting for a text back, an update of some kind. Maybe if she was lucky, Emily would even send her a summit selfie or something like that. However, there was no response. And that's when Emily's mother's pride started to turn into deep dread. And her fears only grew bigger when eventually she arrived back at the Lafayette Place campground, the parking lot where she was expecting to meet up with her daughter, and she realized that Emily wasn't there. Now, maybe Emily was just running a little bit behind schedule. Her mother knew that the weather probably slowed her down a little bit, and maybe the weather also limited her cell service, and so that would explain why she never got a text back. Just like she had done for a response for the text message, her mother waited and waited for her daughter to come striding down the old bridle path with her trademark smile plastered on her face. But Emily still hadn't arrived by the time the sun started to go down, and that's when her mother knew that something had gone terribly wrong. It was at this time that her mother had to make the phone call that no mother ever wants to make or should have to make. She had to call and report her daughter missing. Search teams began to mobilize very quickly. At the height of the search, almost 50 search and rescue crew members and canine teams jumped into action all across the area to try to find Emily. They even had helicopter crews scanning the forest from up in the sky. And this is the moment where this story starts to sound a lot like one from February of 2015 that I covered just a few months ago, the story of Kate Matrasova. Kate was also an experienced and confident mountaineer, even more experienced than Emily, actually, in terms of big summits. Kate got caught between Mount Madison and Mount Adams in the White Mountains, and that's when everything started to go wrong. If you haven't yet, I do think you should go watch that whole story about Kate, but in the interest of time, I'll just tell you that she ended up getting lost in a blizzard, and by the time rescuers found her, she was lying face down in the snow just a few hundred feet off the trail. Her body was essentially frozen where she had fallen. The mountain had just straight up overpowered her, and I couldn't help but compare her story to Emily's because, well, Kate was found just a few hundred yards away from the Madison Spring hut, a very similar hut to Greenleaf. But of course, in the whiteout conditions and the violent winds, that hut might as well have been miles and miles away, right? Which is another scary similarity to Emily's story. Emily had reached the Greenleaf hut, which could have been a much needed shelter from the wind if it hadn't been locked up for the season. Although, to be clear, they have protocols they need to follow. They can't just leave their huts unlocked all winter. I mean, so I get why they locked it up, but still, it makes you wonder. The biggest difference between Kate's story and Emily's story was the 11 bizarre distress signals sent from Kate's personal locator beacon, which created critical confusion during the rescue. And although the first signal did point rescuers to the correct location, a second faulty device sent these misleading signals that led teams off course and kind of scattered them across the mountain right as conditions were worsening. And somewhere in that chaos, Kate kept fighting, but in the end, the mountain didn't give her a second chance. And I really can't shake all the different ways that these two stories overlap. Two very competent, accomplished women setting out solo in the White Mountains despite the brutal conditions, and they both disappeared near a key alpine shelter too. And the only reason that Kate even had the slightest chance of being rescued was because she had that personal locator beacon. But the only thing that Emily had on her was her cell phone, and the cell phone service way up on Mount Lafayette was spotty at best. And what this means is that unlike Kate, Emily had zero way of calling for help. And by this point, she had been up there missing for 2 whole freezing nights. If she was going to make it down off the mountain, she was going to have to do it all by herself. And so thinking back on Kate's story, a lot of people wondered if Emily was just right off the trail, just like Kate had been. Investigators were forced to consider every possible theory if they were going to have any chance to find her, right? Maybe she had simply lost the trail. I mean, Franconia Ridge in winter conditions can be extremely difficult to navigate. Snow drifts can bury entire sections of the trail, and visibility can disappear when the fog rolls in or the high winds kick up. Normally, hikers can rely on stone cairns to guide them from one peak to the next, the rocks that they stack up above treeline. But in severe weather, those cairns, or is it cairns? I don't know. They're pretty much impossible to find when you can barely see 2 feet in front of you, right? Emily might have lost the trail, and if she was disoriented and facing brutal wind and cold, one wrong turn could have been the difference between life and death. Investigators also had to consider the possibility that maybe Emily had somehow decided to follow one of the small mountain streams that winds throughout the valley near Old Bridle Path. Authorities did search along Walker Brook and Dry Brook to see if either of them held any answers. I mean, if she had gravitated towards the water, maybe she could have fallen into one of the creeks and then froze. However, after further investigation, neither of those 2 streams showed any sign that Emily had been there, which meant that the mystery of her disappearance just continued to deepen. But after 2 intense days of crisscrossing the area, authorities made their biggest discovery yet and it meant that Emily's time might be running out even faster than they had originally thought. The temperature was still in the low single digits Fahrenheit as search and rescue crews headed up Mount Lafayette on the afternoon of Tuesday, November 22nd. The wind was still consistently whipping through the area, and according to James Nealand, a lieutenant from New Hampshire Fish and Game, the conditions had made it extremely difficult for his crews to make any progress at all. I mentioned earlier that crews had searched the two streams closest to the old bridle path, but after they found zero trace of Emily in either one of them, they essentially decided to expand the search area beyond the trail itself. Maybe Emily had gone much further off trail than anyone had originally expected. That's what they were thinking. And so one of those expanded search and rescue crews were sent to look around a different stream that was a little north of the initial search area. And this stream was called Lafayette Brook. That crew navigated the extremely harsh weather and trudged through snow that was almost waist deep, which is insane for November. And as they were doing this, one of the members noticed something that stood out in this bright white snow. The mysterious objects, or objects, they weren't really sure yet, well, it was laying on the ground right beside the edge of Lafayette Brook. The curious searchers kept pushing a few extra feet through the deep snow, and when they finally arrived at this unknown object, they knew almost immediately that they had found a major clue in this case. It was a backpack. Now, I couldn't tell for sure through any of the reports if the backpack had been found inside the stream itself, or if it had washed up, or if it was found near the stream, fully out of the water. But I did find a quote from James Nealand that said that they had discovered a few familiar items inside the backpack: granola bars, a banana, and a water bottle that had frozen solid. They obviously assumed that they had found Emily Sotelo's backpack and her other belongings way out there by Lafayette Brook, which was just a little bit north of where they had been searching originally. The crew also noticed a few possible tracks in the snow nearby Emily's belongings, but it had taken them almost 2 hours to travel just 900 feet, crunching over small trees packed with ice and sinking into the snow. The area was proving to be almost impossible for even these well-prepared and well-trained crews to navigate. And I can only imagine what kind of a nightmare it would have been for someone like Emily, who definitely didn't have the right kind of gear for this stuff. The searchers desperately wanted to follow these tracks and see where they led, especially after a helicopter above had spotted even more tracks. But at this point, it was starting to get dark and extremely unsafe. And so, unfortunately, the search was called off for the day. I mean, if they were going to have any chance to find and hopefully save Emily, they had to hope against hope that she could survive at least one more night in the White Mountains. Early the next morning, crews came right back to the area where Emily's belongings had been found the day before. 3 different search teams approached from different directions. And I mean, they weren't going to let the treacherous terrain keep them from getting to the bottom of this desperate search once and for all. It already sucked enough, frankly, that they had to call off the search the night before. And I realize that might rub some of you the wrong way, but you have to keep in mind, these rescuers were already putting their lives at risk to try to find and save Emily, and pushing on through the night, spending the night up there on the mountain in the freezing cold, in the darkness, that just would have been reckless. And so I just want to be clear, it's not like they just abandoned the search once it got dark. They really had no choice in terms of safety. But, they were back up there the next morning, and each team member expertly climbed over icy downed trees, pushed through the powder, the snow, and followed the rushing waters of Lafayette Brook. And it was just a few hours later, just after 11 a.m., when one of the teams made the biggest breakthrough in the case yet. That particular team was searching the area around the headwaters of the stream, aka the place where the river begins essentially, and that's where they noticed another mysterious object underneath a nearby tree. And this time it was much bigger than just a backpack. They approached it slowly, and I can only assume that each crew member was probably beginning to realize that their long, dangerous search was over, and sadly, they were not going to get a happy ending. There, they found Emily Sotelo's body right near the headwaters of Lafayette Brook, 3/4 of a mile from the trail. She had not survived her battle with the frigid mountain, but it was clear that she put up one hell of a fight. Emily was lying beneath the trees, curled on her side and dusted with fresh fallen snow. Her jacket was open, one of her gloves was missing, and strangely, one of her shoes was missing as well. These parts of the stories are always hard to read, man. Basically, everyone's worst fears had finally been confirmed true. One of the most intelligent, hardworking people to ever set foot in the White Mountains had suddenly become one of its many, many victims. And so, inevitably, everyone started to ask the next obvious question, which was, why? I mean, how had she gotten so far off the trail? How long had she lasted in the below freezing temperatures? Oh, and where the hell was her missing shoe and her glove? Lieutenant Nealon believes that at some point along the ridge between Greenleaf Huts and the summit of Mount Lafayette, Emily may have decided to turn back around due to the insane weather, and then disoriented and facing brutal wind and cold, she likely made a decision that many lost hikers make. She started heading downhill in search of shelter and to get below the tree line where the conditions would be a little bit better. We don't know this for sure, but I'm guessing she basically abandoned the trail, which continued along the ridgeline for a long time, and decided that she needed to just get the hell off the mountain, essentially, and she kind of just went rogue. That's my interpretation, to be clear. I don't know for sure if that's what happened, but regardless, she did wander onto the northwest side of Mount Lafayette, which is an area with almost no marked trails and extremely rugged terrain. Like, being up there, I can't even imagine going off trail in these conditions. Once she began descending, she eventually took a wrong turn and started to move deeper into the wilderness rather than towards safety. The terrain started to get even steeper. There's like huge boulders around this area. The weather was just getting worse, and the thick forest made it impossible to know where you had been or even where you were going. The deep snow covered rocks and fallen trees, which made every step dangerous and uncertain. Even experienced, well-prepared hikers would struggle pushing through terrain like this. Captain Michael Eastman of New Hampshire Fish and Game had his suspicions on the exact spot where Emily made her deadly wrong turn. He said, quote, "There is a 90-degree dogleg on that trail between the hut and the summit. This is a common area where people get waylaid." And boy, does he have a way with words. However, this wrong turn wasn't the only reason for Emily's tragic fate. At some point during her descent, she lost one of her trail shoes, apparently, and it's unclear exactly how this happened, whether it was yanked off in deep snow or if it came loose during like a stumble or a fall. But regardless, suddenly one of her feet was left with only a sock as protection against the harsh conditions. But even with that serious setback, she continued moving downhill, determined to press on. And that's when authorities believe that she began following the Lafayette Brook as it wound through the valley, possibly using it as like a natural guide. At some point along this route, Emily appears to have slipped into the icy water, soaking her foot and her lower leg completely. And in freezing temperatures like this, wet clothing is extremely dangerous because it rapidly increases heat loss and significantly accelerates the onset of hypothermia, turning an already dire situation into a straight up life-threatening one. But still, I mean, she was Emily freaking Sotelo. She was the star student, the superhuman hiker. She clearly didn't even know the meaning of the words give up. And so even more hours passed as she continued to struggle onward through the deep snow and the thick woods, and every step that she took was draining more and more of her strength and her body heat. Her progress would have been very slow and extremely exhausting. The cold would have been wearing her down as fatigue continued to set in. And as daylight began to fade and darkness crept in, Emily eventually found a small piece of shelter beneath a cluster of evergreen trees. Their low, thick branches created like a natural canopy, offering the slightest protection from the wind and the worst of the elements. And so there, she curled into a tight ball beneath the branches, desperately trying to conserve what little warmth she had left, her body instinctively fighting to hold on as the cold closed in around her. But heartbreakingly, it was in that exact same spot under those trees, less than a mile from the nearest trail, that search crews discovered her body, which had ultimately suffered from advanced hypothermia. And to make matters even more tragic, the day they found her was November 23rd, the day of her 20th birthday. The news obviously devastated her family, her friends, and her classmates at Vanderbilt University, where she had been known as a bright and compassionate student with, again, dreams of becoming a doctor. I have like goosebumps thinking about just how much of my story when I was her age, when I was in these same mountains, like thinking about how much of my story I can see in Emily. I was just as obsessed with accomplishing all of my hiking goals as fast as possible back then. I never did Franconia Ridge in November, but I did do Mount Moosilauke, another mountain in the area, in November. And similar to Emily, I was very surprised at how brutal the conditions were up high on the mountain. I ended up fine, obviously, but like, man, this story just hits really hard for me. The same drive that made Emily remarkable may also have been part of the reason that she kept pushing deeper and deeper into the mountains when conditions were obviously very dangerous. In the months that followed, Emily's parents decided that they were going to finish what she had started. They made the very brave decision to return to the White Mountains in safer weather and retrace parts of the route that Emily had taken. Eventually, they reached the summit of Mount Lafayette, and while they were at the top, they knelt down beside a cairn, and they carefully placed a small card with a photograph of Emily smiling during a past hike. Beneath the photo was a short message that read, quote, "Your light blazes on, our shooting star." Today, Emily's story continues to circulate among hikers as both a memorial as well as a cautionary tale. And that includes an organization called the Emily M. Sotelo Safety and Persistence Charitable Organization, which was started by her family in her honor. Emily's mission in life was to find a way to help all children get the experience and opportunities that she had as a child, and after volunteering in 2021 at a charter school in New Mexico, she had developed an after-school STEM program that meant a lot to her. Emily kept in touch with all the young boys and girls from the school, and she would frequently write to them about the beauty of nature. The organization's goal is to make the world a better place by promoting safe hiking, offering knowledge and resources, and helping the underprivileged. And so if Emily's story made an impact on you in any way, I seriously encourage you to look into their organization and consider joining me in making a donation to them if you can, even if it's just a few bucks. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. I will link them in the description, and I hope that you can show her and her family some love in the comments as well. Thank you for watching, and if you liked this video, YouTube seems to think you'll like this one next. And do me a favor, if you're ever in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, be sure to stay safe out there. Check the weather constantly, and even if you do that, be prepared for forecasts to change on a dime. We shouldn't be afraid of Mother Nature, but we should always respect her.